I'll wait for. Alrighty. Oh, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And good afternoon, and welcome to Writer's House, Kelly Writer's House. My name is Lorene Cary. I teach creative writing here. Happy to do it at University of Pennsylvania. One of my earliest students. Actually, not my earliest students. I had I've been here a long time. One of my students was Liz Silver, who, it's very funny. One remembers different things from different classes. I remember the care with which you revised a piece, and I remember a piece you wrote about summer camp. Now, here's the fact. Look at my gray hair. I've read a lot of pieces about summer camp, okay? There've been a lot of summer camp pieces. This is the one I remember.
Wow.
Yours is the one I remember, yeah. Liz Silver is the author of this book we're going to discuss, The Majority. Excellent novel. We're going to talk about that. She has also written a memoir called The Tincture of Time, which was a memoir of what she calls medical uncertainty. She and I have been talking a lot about medical uncertainty. Liz, I remember, was always very careful about facts in nonfiction and also in fiction. She's written a novel, The Execution of Noah P. Singleton. Washington Post has called her work fantastic. It's called masterful, stunning, etc. She lives in Los Angeles now, and The Execution of Noah P. Singleton was an Amazon Best Book of the Year. I don't know what year that was.
It was 2013, quite a long time ago.
Well, no, not. And it's gotten reviews from Kirkus, Kansas City Star, Best Book of the Year selection for the Target Emerging Author Series. These may not, these may sort of go over you, but the fact is that means somebody wants to sell the book more widely. Somebody wants to move it around, make sure other people see it. She's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania right here, MFA from East Anglia University in England, and then came back here, went to the Temple University Beasley School of Law. All right. She's worked as an attorney in California and Texas. In Texas, she was the judicial clerk for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. She worked on death row cases and subsequently in civil litigation in Los Angeles. I'm going to stop with some of those. We're going to, cover some more of those. I'd like to say that during this time, when all of us feel so close to what is happening, certainly what's happening in the Middle East, in Israel, when we're so full up with feelings about that, I'll tell you, one of the things I did was I did like I did when I was a little girl, which is I went to a book and I walked into that world. This world is alive, it's full of ideas, it's full of feelings, it's full of extraordinary individuals. It's not a fantasy world. I mean, it's full of all kinds of pain, but it let me get close to the very things that throughout my life I know my world has struggled with. And I was grateful to be there with them, written intelligently, written with compassion and with passion. So, Liz Silver, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so moved by your words, and I'm I can't believe that you remembered that essay I wrote. I have to tell.
She wrote it so many times.
So many. And I should have known then that that is a precursor for everything in the writing life, how many times you rewrite and you rewrite. And I have to say to everyone here and wherever people are, if they watch this online later, to be back here at the writer's house in this seat is an extraordinary moment and feeling, because I was here as a student. I graduated in 2001, and my very first creative writing class was with this extraordinary woman to my right. And here, upstairs, in this house, upstairs.
Yes. Yeah.
It was a creative nonfiction class. And that I really think that in many ways that class and many of the others that followed it really changed my life and changed my trajectory. I was studying English, I was studying creative writing, but I didn't know that that was something that I could do. I didn't know that that was something that was possible. And I loved your class, your workshop so much, and the way in which you led us, the way in which you guided us into the writing world, the written word on the page, and the interaction of that in the real world was something that was astonishing to me. And I'm forever, forever grateful to you for that. And I'm just so thrilled to be here at the Writer's House at Penn, my other home, after so many years. And also, I want to acknowledge just this time in which I'm here today, and we're all here, and like others, have been walking around in a fog of sadness and just breaking down into tears for all of the loss of life. And so, I think that our words are so powerful, and I think that's something that I'll attempt to do, in books as a solace, but also as a place in which to explore. And so, thank you for this conversation.
Great. They do. The books explore, they teach, they protest, they confirm, they do all those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we do it right.
Yes.
Right. All right. I want to ask you if you'll read for us a little section. Now, do you have a favorite section you love to read for your 5 minutes?
I often read the prologue, and sometimes I read half of the first chapter, but if there's a section that you'd like me to read, I'm happy to do that too.
Good. Why don't you do the prologue,
Okay.
and then later I may ask you to do another quickie.
Absolutely.
All right.
For those of you who don't know, this is a book called The Majority, and it's a novel, and it's about it's a fictional memoir. It takes the form of a fictional memoir of a first female Supreme Court justice in America, and it follows this woman, Sylvia Olin Bernstein, on her path to power, and her path to what I see in many ways as a modern throne in America, with a lifetime appointment. There really isn't anything else much closer that we have to that, and so it's set over 4 central time periods in America, in the late 40s, the early 60s, the early 70s, and the mid 80s. And so it's framed as, this memoir of this older woman looking back on her life and her journey. And so I'll just read the opening. Found in the desk of the late Sylvia Olin Bernstein, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Half of the United States is waiting for me to die. The other half stands by, candles in hand, praying for me to hang on. At least that's what they tell me. At least that's what they say, but people never really want what they think they want. Every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from October through April, the main doors of the Supreme Court open at 8. There are only 50 seats available for the general public, and by 9:30 a.m., those eager visitors who waited outside for hours will have secured most of them. Sometimes, when nobody's there, I walk into the main courtroom to sit in the back of the gallery. The perspective is different, almost more ominous. From there, I can see 4 marble columns standing tall before deep mahogany curtains edged in gold. When I was younger, I used to stare at the curtains in pictures and later in person, sometimes wanting to hide in them. Now I know better than to hide. On the days we have argument, a court crier pushes the buzzer, warning the crowd that there are 5 minutes to prepare and take a seat. The 9 of us wait in the robing room backstage, where no one can visit, beginning the process of coming out in the courtroom. We have a private pregame ritual, a rotating handshake among all 9 of us as if to say, yes, we are all in this together. Everyone takes part in this tradition, now between 6 men and 3 women who sometimes like each other and sometimes hate each other when the robe is on and tolerate each other when it's off. The court crier opens his mouth. Oyez, oyez, oyez. We walk out of the robing room to take our places behind our specific chairs at the bench. Mine is marked with a tiny gold plaque carved with the initials S.O.B. I take my seat. The Chief Justice glances to either side and picks up his gavel, slamming the wood with a single pound. It pierces the silence as I scan the gallery. My eyes are old, though. They don't always see what's in front of them. My hair has faded from the yellow, stubborn blonde of my youth, and I've lost some of my height, though having started at 5 feet 11 inches, I'm still taller than most of the men who've surrounded me for decades. As arguments open, all eyes are on me, wondering what I'm thinking. But it's my own eyes, still a clear light blue, that are the first to reveal the truth. If you look closely enough, you might have to reconsider everything you know about me, everything you thought you knew about the first female Supreme Court Justice of the United States of America, the Honorable Justice Sylvia Olin Bernstein. The first time I sat in that chair, I felt an unnecessary distance from a breathing life, as if I were meant to be protected by an older code. Outside, people wave signs of praise, of hate, of hope, that the contemptuous SOB might make a change. I hated the name. Just call me bitch, I wanted to say. I'm nobody's son. You see, everyone thinks that I broke the rules, but I didn't. Not really. I just oiled them up a bit for everyone else. But biographers want to present me like that. Pretty but rough. Demanding but kind. A model for how to get to the top as a woman and be remembered in history with elegance and idealism. This is the true story, though. I wouldn't be here if I'd had the luck of my cousin Mariana, or if I'd fought the fight like my friend Linda. Still, history chooses whom to crown an iconoclast, whether they deserve it or not. But history is only as good as the historians, and I'm no longer trusting them to tell my story. Great. I'll leave it there.
So many places to go to start with this. I want to follow that. Mm-hmm. You're a writer. You're a lawyer. Are you still licensed to practice someplace?
I'm still licensed to practice in California, but I just do pro bono work here and there for causes that really matter to me.
Alrighty. You also have started a foundation or a mentoring project, mm-hmm. right? And
yes.
To help other writers by giving them individual mentors. You said it took you 6 years to write this book. How much of that did you start with all research and little writing, and then it ends up half and half, and then more? How long did it take you? What made you decide to, how much Sandra Day O'Connor, how much Ruth Bader Ginsburg, how much, like all of that?
Yeah. So the gestation period, I think, for this book was 6 years. It wasn't writing the book over full 6 years, as mm-hmm. anybody who writes knows. You're doing about 10,000 other things at the same time.
And you have children.
I have children. I teach. I have Onward. I was working on other projects at the same time. But it is a long process. And so I started this book. I started it about 6 years ago. So I was working. I had just finished promoting my second book, Tincture of Time. And I had a 1 and a 3-year-old at the time. And so I was kind of deep in the thick of new motherhood. And I live in Los Angeles, and I was driving home to San Diego. I was from San Diego. And I remember at the time, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still alive, and Sandra Day O'Connor was no longer on the court, but still, I was thinking about them. I was thinking about Hillary Clinton. I was thinking about these other women in great positions of power. And I was curious about how they got there. I was curious about how they got there with respect to motherhood specifically. And I wondered, as I was driving, at the same time, I had realized that the world around me started treating me differently. Not when I started writing books, or not when I went to law school, not in college necessarily, or it was there I was naive to it. I felt that when I became a mother, and the whole world started asking me different questions and had different expectations of me. And I thought about those women with respect to that. Did people ask them those questions? Did they have this position of power and then go home and wonder if they felt like frauds? I wondered what it was like to be them, and at the same time, in this world in which, the book title comes from the fact that a majority opinion in law, it becomes the law in the common law, the majority decision in a court's opinion, and yet it also reflects the fact that women are the majority in America, but the minority in power. And I wanted to explore that. And so I wondered what that looked like. And I had read so many books about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor and Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor. I just wanted to know what was not in those biographies. I wanted to know what was on the cutting room floor. I wanted to see what didn't make it there, the things that maybe I was experiencing, that my friends were experiencing, because we'd all shared the same conversation about when we became mothers. Suddenly people asked us, well, are you continuing to work? And they would touch you, they would ask questions, there's the bias, there's all of these things. And I wanted to explore that. And so I looked at these women and thought, you know what, let me take it to a very intimate level and see what that life looked like, the one that's not in the biography or the biofilm.
There's a study, and I've been trying while you were talking to remember the name of it. I don't remember. But there's a study that says that there is nothing that enforces gender more than in couples. That often there are couples and they decide, we decide, well, you'll do this and I'll do that, and everything is super. When one of them has a baby, then gender is enforced by the society in a different way.
Oh, absolutely.
And the enforcement has to do with hierarchy, right? You talked about being touched during motherhood. I'll just say I know a woman who also was a power person, and she worked in a place, and somebody came over to her when she was very pregnant and put his hand on her belly. Said, "Oh," what? And she reached down and grabbed his scrotum. That was that was her answer.
Wow.
That didn't happen in this book. Because your person was learning, your Sylvia has to learn to get to a steely discipline. She says, "I can't be impetuous." Can we do a little bit of revealing things? She says she's impetuous. What does she do on her first day as a intern for the defense that she later finds she has to apologize for?
Yeah, so it's the idea of being the contemptuous SOB, which is what her kind of nickname is, which is pretty much where the kind of the wink of the nickname, kind of the similarities kind of end there with RBG, but this idea of contempt and what that means. And so on the very first day that she has an internship with a public defender's office, she is held in contempt of court. And she's held in contempt of court not for the reason that I think most people think of with contempt of court, which is, an outcry or screaming or doing something that seems to be loud and disagreeable with the court or with the existing laws. Instead, she is held in contempt for staying silent. She's held in contempt for not speaking up when a judge is speaking to her. And I really wanted to explore contempt in many, many ways. And I think that it is, I think on its face, it seems as though it's a nasty word. And Sylvia explores that in many, many ways. She looks at it from the legal perspective when she is held in contempt of court. And she's held in contempt of court because she's not, she's there on the defense side for a domestic abuser. And she is looking to the victim in the courtroom and unsure of what to say, and understanding that in the law, you're assigned a side, and that is your job, and that is your duty to represent a client, and I think that she's learning at a young age what that means.
She's one of 9 female students at Harvard Law School. Her roommate is another young woman. Is a black woman who later, as a journalist, gives her this name, right? Because she very much wants to help her friend have a power that the friend has not quite stepped into. Not quite. It's wonderful to see the growth of this friendship. And I want to come back to black people, women, rights, etc. But she learns very early. She says that her life changes when her cousin comes to live with them. And this is in the 40s. Her cousin is Mariana. As a creative writing teacher, I've had, a lot of day summer camp. I've had a lot of stories about dates and date rape. I've had a lot of stories by people who sit in on the class about being the children of survivors. This Mariana is a survivor of the Holocaust who tells some of those stories, but not all of them. Will you please read us just a little bit from chapter 2? And I want to get the forgiveness, starting here. Okay, what page is that? 25. If you look up Kindle, the word forgiveness does not come up very often in this book, although the concept is there. And I'd like you to read pages 25 and 26.
Absolutely.
This is, Sylvia is the I, and she's talking about Mariana, who has come to live with them.
Thank you for that setup. And at this point, Sylvia is 12 years old, and Mariana is about 20, a little under 20. Let me start right there, my mother.
Please.
My mother said, "We don't always need change," I said to her. "But if you want to do anything, then you need to stay quiet and play the game. And then once you're in the game properly, you can do things the way you want." "Your mother's a fool," she said, locking eyes with me. I turned away. I see her sitting by quietly. Born a Jew or not, she would have been one of the first burned in the ovens. My gloved hands ran to their partners, each finger fitting with its pair until they formed a large double fist. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. One of the roasted nuts was tearing the flesh at the back of my throat, stealing my voice. I never thought I was like my mother. I wasn't sure I should keep my head down the way she wanted me to, but in that moment, I said nothing to Mariana. I said nothing when she threw away my mother as easily as she threw away a burnt peanut that spoiled the bunch. The first in the ovens. I'm not going to apologize for that, she said. I pictured my mother flat on a board, her eyes closed, her beautiful blonde hair shaved to her scalp as flames consumed her. My entire body convulsed from the inside out, my arms and shoulders waving in the wind like the blue flame of a Shabbat candle, untouchable, shapeless. What's this? Said Mariana, mimicking me. Shrug? You shrug when I speak? You shrug when I speak about my sister? When I speak about your mother like this? I wasn't shrugging, I said, yelling. And my mother isn't a fool. My voice shivered. It hurt to speak, but I liked the way it felt. Nerves crawled all over my skin and back up into my eye. Mariana looked back at me. She was composed again. She grabbed my fingers, pulling them away from my eyes. Right, she said, nodding. Good. I'm glad to see you have something in there. I have something in there, I wanted to say. I feel things. I felt things when you walked into our home. I felt things when I watched you fill with anger, with fuel, with need. You know, Mariana, laws change, I said. They change the laws in Germany, like you said. They can change them to hurt, but they can also change them to help, too, right? I glanced away momentarily at the courthouse. The large doors shut. Are we going to go inside and watch the trial? I asked. She shook her head no. Then she wrapped her arm around my shoulders, squeezing me toward her. I shouldn't have said that about your mother, she said. Then she stood and walked away from me, limping ever so slightly on her left side. She didn't bother waiting. She just assumed I would follow. I almost always did back then. Come, she said, surprised, returning to me, taking my hand and pulling me toward the subway. Let's get home before sundown. Maybe we'll have Shabbos dinner together. I don't think I ever forgave her, though. I moved on. We moved on, but forgiveness is an unpolished gem. You have to examine it to see if it's real.
Thank you. Thank you. Mariana is a difficult character. Where did you go to write her?
So Mariana, and that scene, you know, she's come to America after surviving the Holocaust. She lives with Sylvie and her father and her parents. Her mother, Sylvie's mother, was not born Jewish. She converted when she married her father. And Mariana's entire family was killed in the Holocaust, and she had a twin sister who was experimented on. And she's very tortured. She's very damaged. And she sees Sylvie as somebody who she thinks or hopes is somebody who can say, okay, you might be somebody who has a brain that could go into the law and make sure that what happened there doesn't happen here. And she knows this because she kind of missed out on her whole education. That was when she was taken into the concentration camps and you know, at a time when she lost, and you know, all of the time she could have had education. And so she goes into, as part of kind of exploring this new world in New York, she goes and walks into trials because they're open to the public. And so she brings Sylvie to one of them. And that's what the scene that you just heard was. And so for me, my father was an infant, hidden child in the Holocaust. And so my whole life, he kind of felt more like, I felt like the grandchildren of survivors instead of just a child of a survivor. In fact, he is one. And he, in his older age, has really started taking on that identity as well. My grandfather, his father, was on Schindler's List. And my grandmother, his mother, was in Auschwitz. And they both survived. And they both planned to come back to the small town of Radom. It was not so small. It's the town of Radom, Poland, to find their son. What they did with my father is my grandfather's brother was being hidden by a Polish woman, a non-Jewish woman, in her basement throughout the war. And they were friends. And she had decided she was going to take my baby father in. He was like an infant at this time, or a very young baby. And she got scared at the last minute. So my grandparents didn't know that they basically put my dad on her doorstep before they were taken off to the camps. And she dropped him off at an orphanage because she was scared at that point. And he was then adopted by an entire other family and raised for several years until the end of the war. And my grandparents came back and found him. My grandfather primarily because he was relatively healthy because he was on Schindler's List. And so this woman, her name was Marisha, had this incredible place in my childhood as this woman that kind of saved my father and our family. And right before I started writing this book, actually, when my son was about 9 months old, we finally, for the first time ever, had this kind of going back to Poland, tracing your family roots story, and tried to see as much as we could. And Marisha, we found out, had just died a year earlier. So we weren't able to meet her, but we went to the cemetery and we wanted to pay tribute to her. And we put flowers on her grave and saw that the name was Mariana. Marisha was just a nickname for Mariana. Wow. And so I named the character of Mariana based on her and homage to her in many ways. And as kind of this childhood that I had, that so many people have in my generation, of kind of growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust and knowing how you're kind of always living on borrowed time. And that question of, okay, can it happen here? I don't know. And let's examine that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariana, Marisha. That's great. When your character gets married, Sylvia, is being mentored by the same Harvard law dean who mentored her husband, and who is very ambitious. Will you tell us a little bit? A lot of the book is talking about ambition. What kinds of ambition are correct to have? Because it's a book that keeps thinking about power, right? What was the power in Germany? What is injustice? If you get power, what do you do with it? If power corrupts, how do you get power without becoming corrupted? It's asking all of these questions. Before that, the question I kept having is, what does having children, what does giving birth to children, having children in your own family, either being the human being who, as my grandchildren would say, who pop it out of your vagina? Oh my God. Yeah. Yes, darlings. Yes. Don't please. If you're that person, or if you're the person who has the child who didn't pop it out, what does that do to your life and ambition? What does that do to the way you think of power?
I'm fascinated with ambition. I don't think I expressly set out to write a book about motherhood and ambition, but it became very much a part of that.
Do you want to keep going, or do you want to wait for a minute?
Yeah. Okay.
Which
can wait.
It does. You tell me when.
Can wait a little bit longer.
Okay. For those who are watching us on live stream, we're listening as protests go up and down Locust Walk, and we just want to make sure to take a minute and let it happen. And I also want to make sure to let you be able to concentrate as you're answering. Okay, ambition.
Ambition. Oh, take another moment.
And power.
And power.
Yeah, yep. Well, I'll talk a little bit for a moment about some of the things that I love in this book, and then you can chime in and tell me why I'm wrong, which or should be better. One of the things I'll go to the black roommate, Linda, who it takes the entire book for Sylvia to understand and to see that the roommate says that things have happened that she keeps trying to talk to Sylvia about. She's, I tried to tell you this many times, but you weren't listening. She's one of the characters like Mariana, who says to Sylvia, "This is not all about you." And I think, God, you're so hard on the Sylvia. Wow, Sylvie, you're so hard on her. But they're all pushing this character to be a bigger judge, to be a better listener. They're asking, as we often ask people in our lives who are smart and wise, because we know people who are wise, we know people who are smart, but to have them both, saying to them, please listen some more. And they say it to her over and over again because they have faith that she will evolve. And I kept thinking about how in our the way we do our congressional vetting, we almost don't allow people to evolve. You know, that you if you show that you had this idea here and now 15 years later you've changed, we often publicly talk about that as if that person is wishy-washy or not strong or has no integrity. But in fact, we do want people to evolve, and Sylvie does, in ways that I think many black women wish white friends would evolve. So thank you for doing that in the book. Appreciate that.
I think that that's an interesting. I appreciate all of your comments, and I think that what you're saying about the evolution I hadn't thought about that with respect to judicial hearings, about the things that we say we want to evolve as human beings. I think. I mean, when as a novelist, it's one of the things that we talk about. We want to see an evolution of character, and I don't think that it's always necessary in a character. Sometimes you're examining people, and some people don't change, as much as we want them to.
Yeah, but who wants to read
But
that?
people, exactly, who wants to read that? And I think it's important for us to look at that. And what I was interested in is, Sylvie, and she talks about this in the prologue that I read. This idea of she's just happens to be this person that became that first. And it could have been so many other people, but she is that person. And, she navigated her life in a certain way that was about, trying to find the ways to evolve, right? The ways in which to be revolutionary, the ways in which to support, the ways in which to be, she doesn't like the word radical, and Linda says, but you are. And her mother is radical in a very different way, and Mariana is radical in a very different way. And I thought we can't just look at one kind of action, because it doesn't take one kind of action for anything to happen. It's multiple versions of change, multiple versions of language, of action, of movement to make any change. And I was, when I started to write this, I was interested. A lot of lawyers and a lot of women on the bench, they're very much changing the world in a quiet way. And the women who are quiet out in history don't usually get a lot written about themselves because they don't make as much noise. And we have all these little things that are thrown out there, all these little phrases like be loud, make history. And yes, that's true. Absolutely. But you can also be quiet and make history in a very different way. And you can, and what Sylvie and many other people like her were changing the laws, changing the world through kind of a quiet providence, through words on a page, through changing laws. And I think she looks to her friend Linda, who, they look at things in a different way, and she eventually becomes a journalist. And so they kind of look at it and say from the outside in, from the inside out. And these are two kind of halves of the same coin. She looks at her mother, she looks at Mariana, her mother, who, had very few rights. I mean, she can't have a bank account in her own name at this point in time. And she's changing the way in which Sylvia changes the world, and by raising her. I mean, mothers have the most power out there, and I think society looks at them as having the least. Yeah. Please.
However, that is something that your characters are always arguing back and forth, saying, I don't just want this. I mean, that's what the rabbi would say to her. Mm-hmm. You have power. You're in the home.
Yes.
You should change. And she says, basically, BS.
Yeah. She's like,
I want other power, too.
Yeah, I want other. It's not just about having power in the home. It's about having power out of the home. It's about finding your voice in whichever way you find it, whether it's on the page, whether it's through the law, whether it's marching in the streets, whether it's raising a child, whether it's in a different form of a relationship, whatever form that you find it, that's the way you're finding it and using your voice. And
Linda says, yes, I am for this moment one of the 9 here at Harvard. It does not protect her.
Yeah.
It does not protect her from a predator faculty, and it also doesn't allow her. There are states in the United States where she can't vote. She
Correct.
can go to Harvard Law, but she can't vote. Yeah. Wow.
Which Sylvia does not realize at this time, and it takes her a long time to understand that and to look outside of her own experience, which I think is key for all of us.
Yes. So I want to make sure to see if anybody here wants to ask a question. I have lots more myself, but please, if you do, this is the time.
Dylan has the cordless one. I'm sure you've heard this quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I quote, I don't say women's rights. I say the constitutional principle of the equal citizenship stature of men and women. And I found this believe it or not, in a dress shop, when in the window when Sophie Curson at 19th and near Rittenhouse Square, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, they had many of her quotes in the window, and I was copying them. And a woman came out and she said, "Oh, I'll print them out for you, the way they are in the window." And I was so happy to get this. And there was another one about what her mother said to her. Mm-hmm. And around the corner at Barnes & Noble, when they were there at 18th and Walnut, they had a whole display of all books that were about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But here was a dress shop that were showing dresses that Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have liked to have worn. So I appreciate what you've been saying. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
This is for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I went to Manor College for paralegal studies, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg came in and taught our class. I don't know, there were many attorneys that taught there. I don't know if you taught there or if you took a class there.
Where did you
Elizabeth,
study?
Manor College
No, I didn't.
in Jenkintown. She was very funny. You know, you wouldn't think, your image of a woman who, she wasn't yet on the Supreme Court, but she was going for it. I thought, more conservative, and she had a very strong sense of humor and was very funny, and she was an excellent role model.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Have other people in this room met Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
I saw her speak at the National Book Festival in 2019.
Did it have a did her presence have an impact on you?
Definitely, when she walked on stage, she's a very small woman, but her presence was larger than life, and she walked on, everyone got quiet out of respect to this woman. And I was only 13, but I could tell that she was a force to behold.
I'm curious, given the feelings that we all have for Supreme Court justices, but particularly Ruth Bader Ginsburg, what has the reception of this book been like in relation to taking on historical figures, but not necessarily literally? Yeah. Has that been complicated, or has it been all praise and delight?
It's funny because I sold this book before she passed away. So it's been, I had been writing it for a really long time, and I think that I'm getting a lot of questions about RBG, and she is a loose inspiration for Sylvia. But I have to say, they're different characters at all. So it's not one of those books in which it's a novelization of a particular person's life. It is a loose inspiration about a first woman on the Supreme Court. And for anybody who's any SCOTUS junkies in here, which I am one, you can look at it and you can see, all right, well, she actually has the nickname, which is kind of a little bit of a nod. And there's the Brooklyn Jew part that I looked at, but for personal reasons. But in many ways, a lot of similarities really end. She looks a little bit like Sandra Day O'Connor. She has said some things that I've seen Sonia Sotomayor say. She has had a few jobs that Elena Kagan had, and those are the women who were on the court when I was writing this book. And so, I think the initial impulse is to look and say, oh, it's RBG in so many ways. It's a fictionalization of her life, but it's really not. It's so that's kind of been, I think, once we kind of move past this is inspired by, but not fictionalization of, then it's just, we talk about the book and we talk about the subjects in the book, and you kind of look at Sylvia on her own and her path and her struggles, her, I would never deign to put any of her failures on a real life person. So she is, a figment of my imagination, inspired by so many women in my life. And it's been a big joy to hear stories like you've just shared about RBG, and also talk about other women on the court, and also talk about Sylvia and her experiences.
It's also true that you spend a lot of time in the book imagining her personal life, and imagining the difficulties that she has with her own motherhood, and a lot of the complexity and complications with her daughter.
Yes.
Which you can't do if you're going to base it on somebody else's life. She has a difficult time with her daughter. Her daughter is angry and at her for the way that the work takes away from her time with the family, her attention. Why'd you go there? Why? Why?
I wanted to explore. Well, this, she was raising her daughter really in the 60s and 70s, and I think in many cases those relationships haven't changed all that much between today. All these years later, 50 years later, 50, 60 years later, and I didn't want to have like a cliche. Oh, mom is working all the time and daughter's upset about it, and I think it's more nuanced than that. And so I wanted it to explore that, but at the same time, it's not just, oh, mom is working, and it's how do we navigate? It's more, mom got famous, and at the same time as some other stuff happens in their lives, and she struggles. And I think, it starts off very much as a, looking at ambivalence in motherhood that she might have, which kind of adds to that as well. And it's not true for everyone at the time, so we look at different kinds of, or different women, and, we've got Mariana, who always wanted to have children but was not able to. We have Sylvia, who has a child. We have Linda, who did not want to have a child. And all of these are great, wonderful experiences, and all of them have validity. And I wanted to kind of look at motherhood from all of those lenses and give weight and credence to them. And then I'm just fascinated with mother-daughter stories. I love mother-daughter stories, and so I wanted to incorporate realistically what does this look like? This is not something happening I'm pulling from a real person. This is just, I'm imagining this based on just a lived experience with other people. And I also think that it was important, and she talks about this kind of at the end, of, I just came back from a panel in Boston at the Boston Book Fair, and I was on a panel called Ambition and Motherhood. And we talked about this exact topic. And there were 3 different novelists all approaching it from different experiences and different narratives. And all of us, the moderator asked everybody in the audience to raise their hands if somebody had ever said, who's watching your kids right now? Who's watching your kids while you're out? And I have not had a single experience in any book, this is my 3rd, in any tour, in any event, even if it's in my own home city, about asking who is watching my children while I'm out. And I find this, obviously, the initial reaction to that is insanity, frustration, and wanting to say, well, why aren't you asking the father that, right? That's the initial response. And I felt like I did that myself through my last book tour. And through writing this book, I felt kind of differently about it, actually. I started thinking, don't ask me this if you're not going to ask the fathers or the other mothers, in the audience, this story. I didn't see that so often as a lawyer, I have to say. It's only as a writer. So it's a little bit of a difference there. People aren't asking women in trial who's watching their kids. They're only asking women writers who are asking their kids. So that's just a side. But they are asking, I think it should be more, which is a little more, another conversation also. But I think it's important to say, you know what? Bring that conversation into the forefront, because it is different, and say, ask the fathers who's watching their kids. Don't not ask, if you're going to stop kind of pushing them both away, and instead bring them both out and ask everybody that question if you're going to ask anybody that question. Because Sylvia and Aviva have this conversation, and Sylvia says at one point, it's just different. Perhaps it's because the popping them out story. And there's not a parent I've encountered that hasn't said that my kid treats me differently than they treat their father, or a different parent. And I think that acknowledging some of the difference, at least early on during pregnancy, is important to then move forward, because I think if there's more visibility, then there's hopefully more equity.
And also honesty.
Yes.
Because one of the things that this book does, and I hope not to have said it in a way that makes that, you speak in broad strokes. There's a lot of subtlety, and there are nuances throughout. There's also the fact that this is happening at a time when and I'll just say it out this way. What I call it, what my friends and I call it behind doors, are white feminism. That when that feminism was being argued, then there's all this kind of talk about, well, what if you decide to have a child? Well, what if you don't? Well, where does abortion fit in? Well, where does work fit in? Well, what about the person who stays home? Well, what about like all of this is being argued very thoughtfully in the book, and we see it in terms of the characters and what they're doing and who's in the media. I will also tell you that when I was a very young writer, I remember some of the other mothers who had jobs in offices or one in a factory calling me to pick up their children from school who were sick because they were working and I was only writing. Yeah. So there is a way that we try to understand each other's work and lives, and we don't imagine it well.
It's difficult, and it's not. And I think when we look at things, I think the beauty of fiction, and what I love about it is you are going deep into an individual story. It's a narrative, but at the same time, like the conversation that Sylvia and her husband Joe have when she does become a mother is this question of, obviously, a conversation that so many people have and will continue to have about, well, who's going to stay home, who's not? Well, you make more, so therefore this is the decision. And regardless of, one person saying at this point, he's like, well, I wish I could stay home. I would stay home. And her friend Linda says to her, well, he can be that person. He can want all the kids. But until everybody around him feels the same way, is not really going to change.
Other thoughts? Questions?
Is your goal to become a Supreme Court justice?
No. But thank you for asking. Yes.
I want to thank you for bringing the Holocaust into your story. And survivors have said to me, their fear is that we will forget. And the only way that it won't happen again is that we keep talking about it and being aware of it. And I went back to school in my 30s, and the first thing my mother said to me when I said I've registered, she said, well, who's going to be with the children? So in my generation, that exists.
It exists. It also exists here at Penn. One of the stories that Becky Sinkler tells, and she tells this publicly. Becky Sinkler is an alumna of the University of Pennsylvania. She's also the former editor of the New York Times Book Review. Becky says she came right out of high school, married David, they had their children, and then she decided she would go to college. Her youngest was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6. She decided now she could go back. And the chair of the department said to her, do you have live-in help? And she said, no. And the chair of the department of English said, well, I can't take you in because who will take care of your children? So it was not just who will take care of your children. It was that I make the decision that you may not study English here.
When was this?
Becky's in her 80s now.
Wow.
So this was, I forget when, 60s or 70s.
While pregnancy discrimination was legal, and now it's just,
Yes.
but it was perfectly acceptable to do that then, and now it just takes the form in other ways. There's ways to circumvent it, even though it's illegal. There's bias. There's firing for all sorts of other reasons. There's the fear of bringing a cause of action because you can't lose your job because you need the money. There's arbitration clauses that make it quiet so that if you do have a settlement, nobody will hear about it and there will be no paper trail. Today.
Our older daughter, who was a snowboard instructor in Vermont, came home when she got pregnant. She lived here. We called it family leave because there was no family leave. And when you're pregnant and you're a snowboard instructor, your balance is all, you can't do big jumps anymore. It's a problem. Yeah. And there was no way that she could take leave. So she came back home.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have good ways.
We don't. We are now at the point in which you're not allowed to fire somebody for being pregnant, and with certain qualifications, your job is protected under certain qualifications and in certain states, because every state treats it differently. But we don't have a paid parental leave policy.
We don't. We also, how does that affect hiring, by the way?
I mean, it's not supposed to, but again, it depends on the state, because each state has a different system of protections, and each state and different companies have different laws or different policies in which they will, cover your fees. They will not. You have to work there for 6 months in order to do this, or you have to work there for a year before those protections kick in, and there's nothing in place in order for people to continue having babies and society to continue, and women who have people who have babies, people who give birth, to continue earning an income.
Yeah. And many people say that, therefore, if there's a person who looks like she may pop one out, and another candidate who's less likely, that is a factor in the mind of the person who's hiring, and they don't have to say it.
And this is why, the reason we're talking about this is because this is the case that Sylvia follows. That is kind of the primary case that she follows in the novel, and we see her take to the Supreme Court, and so that's kind of the subject matter when we get to any sort of law. I mean, the book is ultimately about her personal life and her relationships, her marriage, mentorship, friendship, motherhood, but on her path to the Supreme Court, that is kind of the issue that she takes hold of for personal reasons and runs with.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Thank you. I always love these moments. They remind me of Quaker moments. And when, the Quakers are not afraid to have silence for a moment because there's so many thoughts and feelings running through. My friend, whom I have known as a Quaker, actually, went to Poland recently. He is a man who's my age who has always worked as an immigration lawyer. And when they got to Poland in a trip organized by his brother, they got to a high school where they saw the names of the people who were to have graduated, who were expelled from their high school 3 weeks before graduation.
Oh, wow.
Because they were Jews. But they did have enough time to get out alive. So they're standing there, my friend and her husband were standing in front of this place. He's just taking it all in. He also, in the couple, is the more sort of quiet, kind of thoughtful one. She says to the people coming out, "Do you know who this is? Do you speak English? Look, this man, that name, that's his grandfather." And the teacher who walks by, who does speak perfect English, by the way, says, "Wait a moment. I will get my class settled. You must come into the school." And she walks him in, and she sits him down at a desk. And they come home and they tell me this.
Wow.
I said, "You were waiting in silence as a Quaker all those years to find out this is where you come from."
Wow. Yeah. That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
I'd like both your opinions on this issue. I saw a woman with a black T-shirt with white sign on the front, and it said, "Motherhood is political." And I truly believe that too, because during the 1960s, they gave thousands or maybe millions of women birth control pills, and I was one of them. And it was a very high dosage, and I ended up in the hospital. But the issue was, why weren't the politicians complaining then about birth control? And the reason I feel is because they were investing in the medicine or the pill, and they didn't want to stop the pill. But now that women have been on the pill and they want to have abortions, then they deny them the right or the privilege or whatever to have the abortion or the treatment in case there is treatment is needed for the same effect. So I would like your opinions on abortion. Is it in the book?
It's in the book. It's in the book. You got to read the book. Okay? She won't say it because it's her book and she's very gracious. You must. You got to read the book because it's so nuanced and it's so. Now, do you want to piggyback your question on this lady's question? Is that? I see your hand. Oh, okay. All right. So for a moment, nobody in the world needs my opinion on it except. Nobody in the world needs my opinion right now. Your book has brought up the subject, the issue. Do you want to answer this? Do you want to comment?
I liked your answer.
And the only reason I'm saying this, I'm protecting the fact that you write a book and it has the subject in it doesn't always mean that you want to do a sort of a policy answer. And so I'm sort of shielding my. All right, thank you. But I do believe motherhood itself is always political. Absolutely. Thank you. One last question, and then I think, please.
Thank you. My question is, what motivates you to write this book? What really inspired you? I know that your grandfather, was a Jewish. So my question is, what really motivates you? And I mean, it's still level of question. So what motivates you and what really inspired you to write this book and also to become a writer for this generation and to represent the female as well?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been very inspired to become a writer by this woman right here in so many ways. So, yes. This book in particular, I should say, I think I was working on a big historical novel set in the 19th century and like New England that was dealing with neuroscience and all these other things. And I might come back to it at some point, but it was pulling like a footnote from like neuroscience history about something. And because my second book was exploring medicine and neuroscience in many ways. And so I was kind of in that headspace. And then it was really that moment in which I was kind of, I was a new mother. And so a lot of times I've been asked this question about, more about like my legal background, which in many ways was, I didn't know how to make a living as a writer or what that path was. And so I got my MFA in creative writing, and then I got a law degree because I didn't know. I mean, would I publish? Would I make enough money? How would I survive? All of these questions. And so I joke that I have the income of a writer and the student debt of a lawyer, which is probably not a great combination. But I'd always wanted to write my entire life. And it's really during college and after that I really started taking it seriously. And so it wasn't necessarily law that inspired this, even though it's about the path to power of this one woman, a woman who becomes the first woman on the Supreme Court. It really was about it was during my experience in motherhood, in which I started seeing even a new level unequal treatment between the genders, and in which I didn't feel earlier necessarily. Like my parents didn't treat me and my brother and my sister differently because of our gender, and I didn't feel it in college. I didn't feel it in law school. I didn't feel it in early jobs even. I felt it the minute I became a mother, and I love being a mother, and I love being a writer. I love working. I didn't feel my ambition shrank when I became a mother at all. I think that two things can be held equally in the same space, and I was shocked that we hadn't moved beyond that. My kids are 7 and 9 now, and I don't know how much it's different in the last 6 years or in the last 9 years. Not a whole lot, I think, in terms of how society looks at parenthood or at motherhood. So is motherhood political? Yes. But should it be? No. And so I was kind of really interested in exploring ambition, motherhood in our society, but looking at, in many ways, if I take the story of a person on the Supreme Court, in many ways, I hope that other people will read this. You've got the Supreme Court involved. You've got a high-profile person involved, fictional person, and buried in there is this exploration of pregnancy discrimination. Buried in there is this exploration, and I hope a nuanced way, of the narrative, the path for women and all different kinds of women with different backgrounds and different class backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, everything, so because no two women's experience is the same. And I think that that's something that is really important to acknowledge. And so I wanted to explore that in this book. And so that was really kind of the motivation for this. I was like, I'm going to put down that big historical novel. I can come back to it. I wanted to center something on this topic that I was experiencing personally, and a voice that came really close, that came very quickly to me. And so I, on that drive from San Diego to Los Angeles back home, I pulled over on the side of the freeway and was texting myself a few opening lines because Sylvia's voice just started calling to me. And I had to get it down, and it was hard because I had spent almost a year researching and working on that other book. And that's a hard thing to pivot from, but I did, and then just devoted everything to writing this book.
Great. Although I hope in my class we always say whatever you were writing is running laps. Sometimes we think, oh, this is it because I've put thousands of words down, but in fact, some of that writing is just exercising for the next book.
Yeah, I love that, running laps. I don't remember that, and now I'm going to remember that wholeheartedly. I like when I teach, I with the killing your darlings, cliche, I say they're not killed, they're just on life support, and I have a whole file on my on my desktop that's life support. This word, this phrase, this chapter. I'll come back to it at some point in some form, in some capacity.
And sometimes it's just every time you go out to run in the morning. Yeah. Every time a great tennis player is out there practicing. Yeah. Is not it's not Wimbledon.
Yeah. You had to write that in order to get here.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.